This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Paul Gabriel Weiner, East Brunswick, New Jersey, September 2006. The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 65. A Conjugal Scene. At the Place Louis XV, the three young people separated. That is to say, Morel went to the boulevards, Chateau Renaud to the Pont de la Révolution, and Debray to the quay. Most probably Morel and Chateau Renaud returned to their domestic hearths, as they say in the gallery of the Chamber in well-turned speeches, and in the theatre of the Rue Richelieu in well-written pieces. But it was not the case with Debray. When he reached the wicket of the Louvre, he turned to the left, galloped across the Carrousel, passed through the Rue Saint-Roch, and, issuing from the Rue de la Michaudière, he arrived at Monsieur Danglars' door just at the same time that Villefort's landau, after having deposited him and his wife at the Faubourg Saint-Honoré, stopped to leave the Baroness at her own house. Debray, with the air of a man familiar with the house, entered first into the court, threw his bridle into the hands of a footman, and returned to the door to receive Madame Danglars, to whom he offered his arm to conduct her to her apartments. The gate once closed, and Debray and the Baroness alone in the court, he asked, "What was the matter with you, Hermine, and why were you so affected at that story, or rather fable, which the Count related?" "Because I have been in such shocking spirits all the evening, my friend," said the Baroness. "No, Hermine," replied Debray, "you cannot make me believe that. On the contrary, you were in excellent spirits when you arrived at the Count's. Monsieur Danglars was disagreeable, certainly, but I know how much you care for his ill humor. Someone has vexed you. I will allow no one to annoy you." "You are deceived, Lucien, I assure you," replied Madame Danglars, "and what I have told you is really the case, added to the ill humor you remarked, but which I did not think it worth while to allude to." It was evident that Madame Danglars was suffering from that nervous irritability which women frequently cannot account for even to themselves, or that, as Debray had guessed, she had experienced some secret agitation that she would not acknowledge to anyone. Being a man who knew that the former of these symptoms was one of the inherent penalties of womanhood, he did not then press his inquiries, but waited for a more appropriate opportunity when he should again interrogate her, or receive an avowal proprio motu. At the door of her apartment the Baroness met Mademoiselle Cornélie, her confidential maid. "What is my daughter doing?" asked Madame Danglars. "She practiced all the evening, and then went to bed," replied Mademoiselle Cornélie. "Yet I think I hear her piano." "It is Mademoiselle Louise d'Armilly, who is playing while Mademoiselle Danglars is in bed." "Well," said Madame Danglars, "come and undress me." They entered the bedroom. Debray stretched himself upon a large couch, and Madame Danglars passed into her dressing-room with Mademoiselle Cornélie. "My dear Monsieur Lucien," said Madame Danglars through the door, "you are always complaining that Eugénie will not address a word to you." "Madame," said Lucien, playing with the little dog, who, recognizing him as a friend of the house, expected to be caressed, "I am not the only one who makes similar complaints. I think I heard Morcerf say that he could not extract a word from his betrothed." "True," said Madame Danglars, "yet I think this will all pass off, and that you will one day see her enter your study." "My study?" "At least that of the minister." "Why so?" "To ask for an engagement at the opera. Really, I never saw such an infatuation for music. It is quite ridiculous for a young lady of fashion." Debray smiled. "Well," said he, "let her come, with your consent and that of the Baron, and we will try to give her an engagement, though we are very poor to pay such talent as hers." "Go, Cornélie," said Madame Danglars. "I do not require you any longer." Cornélie obeyed, and the next minute Madame Danglars left her room in a charming loose dress, and came and sat down close to Debray. Then she began thoughtfully to caress the little spaniel. Lucien looked at her for a moment in silence. "Come, Hermine," he said after a short time, "answer candidly. Something vexes you, is it not so?" "Nothing," answered the Baroness. And yet, as she could scarcely breathe, she rose and went towards a looking-glass. "I am frightful to-night," she said. Debray rose, smiling, and was about to contradict the Baroness upon this latter point, when the door opened suddenly. Monsieur Danglars appeared. Debray reseated himself. At the noise of the door, Madame Danglars turned round and looked upon her husband with an astonishment she took no trouble to conceal. "Good evening, madam," said the banker. "Good evening, Monsieur Debray." Probably the Baroness thought this unexpected visit signified a desire to make up for the sharp words he had uttered during the day. Assuming a dignified air, she turned round to Debray, without answering her husband. "Read me something, Monsieur Debray," she said. Debray, who was slightly disturbed at this visit, recovered himself when he saw the calmness of the Baroness, and took up a book marked by a mother-of-pearl knife inlaid with gold. "Excuse me," said the banker, "but you will tire yourself, Baroness, by such late hours, and Monsieur Debray lives some distance from here." Debray was petrified, not only to hear Danglars speak so calmly and politely, but because it was apparent that beneath outward politeness there really lurked a determined spirit of opposition to anything his wife might wish to do. The Baroness was also surprised, and showed her astonishment by a look which would doubtless have had some effect upon her husband if he had not been intently occupied with the paper, where he was looking to see the closing stock quotations. The result was that the proud look entirely failed of its purpose. "Monsieur Lucien," said the Baroness, "I assure you I have no desire to sleep, and that I have 1,000 things to tell you this evening, which you must listen to, even though you slept while hearing me." "I am at your service, madam," replied Lucien coldly. "My dear Monsieur Debray," said the banker, "do not kill yourself tonight listening to the follies of Madame Danglars, for you can hear them as well tomorrow. But I claim tonight, and will devote it, if you will allow me, to talk over some serious matters with my wife." This time the blow was so well aimed, and hit so directly, that Lucien and the Baroness were staggered, and they interrogated each other with their eyes, as if to seek help against this aggression. But the irresistible will of the master of the house prevailed, and the husband was victorious. "Do not think I wish to turn you out, my dear Debray," continued Danglars. "Oh, no, not at all. An unexpected occurrence forces me to ask my wife to have a little conversation with me. It is so rarely I make such a request, I am sure you cannot grudge it to me." Debray muttered something, bowed, and went out, knocking himself against the edge of the door like Nathan in Athalie. "It is extraordinary," he said, when the door was closed behind him, "how easily these husbands whom we ridicule gain an advantage over us." Lucien having left, Danglars took his place on the sofa, closed the open book, and placing himself in a dreadfully dictatorial attitude, he began playing with the dog. But the animal, not liking him as well as Debray, and attempting to bite him, Danglars seized him by the skin of his neck, and threw him upon the couch on the other side of the room. The animal uttered a cry during the transit, but, arrived at its destination, it crouched behind the cushions, and, stupefied at such unusual treatment, remained silent and motionless. "Do you know, sir," asked the Baroness, "that you are improving? Generally you are only rude, but tonight you are brutal." "It is because I am in worse humor than usual," replied Danglars. Hermine looked at the banker with supreme disdain. These glances frequently exasperate the pride of Danglars, but this evening he took no notice of them. "And what have I to do with your ill humor?" said the Baroness, irritated at the impassibility of her husband. "Do these things concern me? Keep your ill humor at home in your money boxes, or, since you have clerks whom you pay, vent it upon them." "Not so," replied Danglars. "Your advice is wrong, so I shall not follow it. My money boxes are my Pactolus, as, I think, Monsieur de Moustier says, and I will not retard its course, or disturb its calm. My clerks are honest men, who earn my fortune, whom I pay much below their deserts, if I may value them according to what they bring in. Therefore I shall not get into a passion with them. Those with whom I will be in a passion are those who eat my dinners, mount my horses, and exhaust my fortune." "And pray, who are the persons who exhaust your fortune? Explain yourself more clearly, I beg, sir." Oh, make yourself easy. I am not speaking in riddles, and you will soon know what I mean. The people who exhaust my fortune are those who draw out 700,000 francs in the course of an hour. I do not understand you, sir, said the Baroness, trying to disguise the agitation of her voice and the flush of her face. You understand me perfectly, on the contrary, said Danglars. But, if you will persist, I will tell you that I have just lost 700,000 francs upon the Spanish loan. And pray, asked the Baroness, am I responsible for this loss? Why not? Is it my fault that you have lost 700,000 francs? Certainly it is not mine. Once for all, sir, replied the Baroness sharply, I tell you I will not hear cash named. It is a style of language I never heard in the house of my parents, or in that of my first husband. Oh, I can believe that, for neither of them was worth a penny. The better reason for my not being conversant with the slang of the bank, which is here dinning in my ears from morning to night, that noise of jingling crowns, which are constantly being counted and recounted, is odious to me. I know only one thing I dislike more, which is the sound of your voice. Really, said Danglars. Well, this surprises me, for I thought you took the liveliest interest in all my affairs. I? What could put such an idea into your head? Yourself. Ah, what next? Most assuredly. I should like to know upon what occasion. Oh, mon Dieu, that is very easily done. Last February you were the first who told me of the Haitian funds. You had dreamed that a ship had entered the harbor at Havre, that this ship brought news that a payment we had looked upon as lost was going to be made. I know how clear-sighted your dreams are. I therefore purchased immediately as many shares as I could of the Haitian debt, and I gained 400,000 francs by it, of which 100,000 have been honestly paid to you. You spent it as you pleased. That was your business. In March there was a question about a grant to a railway. 3 companies presented themselves, each offering equal securities. You told me that your instinct, and although you pretend to know nothing about speculations, I think on the contrary that your comprehension is very clear upon certain affairs. Well, you told me that your instinct led you to believe that the grant would be given to the company called the Southern. I bought 2/3 of the shares of the company. As you had foreseen, the shares trebled in value, and I picked up 1,000,000, from which 250,000 francs were paid to you for pin money. Have you spent this 250,000 francs? It is no business of mine. When are you coming to the point? Cried the Baroness, shivering with anger and impatience. Patience, madam, I am coming to it. That's fortunate. In April you went to dine at the minister's. You heard a private conversation respecting Spanish affairs, on the expulsion of Don Carlos. I bought some Spanish shares. The expulsion took place, and I pocketed 600,000 francs the day Charles V repassed the Bidosa. Of those 600,000 francs, you took 50,000 crowns. They were yours. You disposed of them according to your fancy, and I asked no questions. But it is not the less true that you have this year received 500,000 livres. Well, sir, and what then? Ah, yes. It was just after this that you spoiled everything. Really, your manner of speaking. It expresses my meaning, and that is all I want. Well, 3 days after you talked politics with Monsieur Debray, and you fancied from his words that Don Carlos had returned to Spain. Well, I sold my shares. The news got out, and I no longer sold. I gave them away. Next day I find the news was false, and by this report I have lost 700,000 francs. Well? Well, since I gave you 1/4 of my gains, I think you owe me 1/4 of my losses. The 1/4 of 700,000 francs is 175,000 francs. What you say is absurd, and I cannot see why Monsieur Debray's name is mixed up in this affair." "Because if you do not possess the 175,000 francs I reclaim, you must have lent them to your friends, and Monsieur Debray is one of your friends." "For shame!" exclaimed the Baroness. "Oh, let us have no gestures, no screams, no modern drama, or you will oblige me to tell you that I see Debray leave here, pocketing the whole of the 500,000 livres you have handed over to him this year, while he smiles to himself, saying that he has found what the most skilful players have never discovered, that is, a roulette wheel where he wins without paying, and is no loser when he loses." The Baroness became enraged. "Wretch!" she cried, "will you dare to tell me that you did not know what you now reproach me with?" "I do not say that I did know it, and I do not say that I did not know it. I merely tell you to look into my conduct during the last 4 years that we have ceased to be husband and wife, and see whether it has not always been consistent. Some time after our rupture you wished to study music under the celebrated baritone who made such a successful appearance at the Théâtre Italien. At the same time I felt inclined to learn dancing of the danseuses who acquired such a reputation in London. This cost me, on your account and mine, 100,000 francs. I said nothing, for we must have peace in the house, and 100,000 francs for a lady and gentleman to be properly instructed in music and dancing are not too much. Well, you soon became tired of singing, and you take a fancy to study diplomacy with the minister's secretary. You understand it signifies nothing to me so long as you pay for your lessons out of your own cash-box. But today I find you are drawing on mine, and that your apprenticeship may cost me 700,000 francs per month. Stop there, madam, for this cannot last. Either the diplomatist must give his lessons gratis, and I will tolerate him, or he must never set his foot again in my house. Do you understand, madame?" "Oh, this is too much!" cried Hermine, choking. "You are worse than despicable." "But," continued Danglars, "I find you do not even pause there. Insults!" "You are right. Let us leave these facts alone, and reason coolly. I have never interfered in your affairs excepting for your good. Treat me in the same way. You say you have nothing to do with my cash-box. Be it so. Do as you like with your own, but do not fill or empty mine. Besides, how do I know that this was not a political trick, that the minister, enraged at seeing me in the opposition, and jealous of the popular sympathy I excite, has not concerted with Monsieur Debray to ruin me?" "A probable thing." "Why not? Who ever heard of such an occurrence as this? A false telegraphic dispatch. It is almost impossible for wrong signals to be made as they were in the last 2 telegrams. It was done on purpose for me. I am sure of it." "Sir," said the Baroness humbly, "are you not aware that the man employed there was dismissed, that they talked of going to law with him, that orders were issued to arrest him, and that this order would have been put into execution if he had not escaped by flight, which proves that he was either mad or guilty? It was a mistake." "Yes, which made fools laugh, which caused the minister to have a sleepless night, which has caused the minister's secretaries to blacken several sheets of paper, but which has cost me 700,000 francs." "But, sir," Hermine said suddenly, "if all this is, as you say, caused by Monsieur Debray, why, instead of going direct to him, do you come to me and tell me of it? Why, to accuse the man, do you address the woman?" "Do I know Monsieur Debray? Do I wish to know him? Do I wish to know that he gives advice? Do I wish to follow it? Do I speculate? No, you do all this, not I." "Still, it seems to me that as you profit by it—" Danglars shrugged his shoulders. "Foolish creature!" he exclaimed. "Women fancy they have talent because they have managed 2 or 3 intrigues without being the talk of Paris. But know that if you had even hidden your irregularities from your husband, who has but the commencement of the art, for generally husbands will not see, you would then have been but a faint imitation of most of your friends among the women of the world. But it has not been so with me. I see, and have always seen, during the last 16 years. You may perhaps have hidden a thought, but not a step, not an action, not a fault has escaped me, while you flattered yourself upon your address, and firmly believed you had deceived me. What has been the result? That, thanks to my pretended ignorance, there is none of your friends, from Monsieur de Villefort to Monsieur de Pré, who has not trembled before me. There is not one who has not treated me as master of the house, the only title I desire with respect to you. There is not one, in fact, who would have dared to speak of me as I have spoken of them this day. I will allow you to make me hateful, but I will prevent your rendering me ridiculous, and, above all, I forbid you to ruin me." The Baroness had been tolerably composed until the name of Villefort had been pronounced, but then she became pale, and, rising as if touched by a spring, she stretched out her hands as though conjuring an apparition. She then took 2 or 3 steps towards her husband, as though to tear the secret from him, of which he was ignorant, or which he withheld from some odious calculation, odious as all his calculations were. "Monsieur de Villefort, what do you mean?" "I mean that Monsieur de Narration, your first husband, being neither a philosopher nor a banker, or perhaps being both, and seeing there was nothing to be got out of a king's attorney, died of grief or anger at finding, after an absence of 9 months, that you had been anciette 6. I am brutal. I not only allow it, but boast of it. It is one of the reasons of my success in the commercial business. Why did he kill himself instead of you? Because he had no cash to save. My life belongs to my cash. Monsieur de Bray has made me lose 700,000 francs. Let him bear his share of the loss, and we will go on as before. If not, let him become bankrupt for the 250,000 livres, and do as all bankrupts do, disappear. He is a charming fellow, I allow, when his news is correct. But when it is not, there are 50 others in the world who would do better than he." Madame Danglars was rooted to the spot. She made a violent effort to reply to this last attack, but she fell upon a chair thinking of Villefort, of the dinner scene, of the strange series of misfortunes which had taken place in her house during the last few days, and changed the usual calm of her establishment to a scene of scandalous debate. Danglars did not even look at her, though she did her best to faint. He shut the bedroom door after him, without adding another word, and returned to his apartments. And when Madame Danglars recovered from her half-fainting condition, she could almost believe that she had had a disagreeable dream. End of chapter 65.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Kirsten Ferreri, Los Angeles, California, July 2006. The Count of Monte Cristo, by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 54. A Flurry in Stocks. Some days after this meeting, Albert de Morcerf visited the Count of Monte Cristo at his house in the Champs-Élysées, which had already assumed that palace-like appearance which the Count's princely fortune enabled him to give even to his most temporary residences. He came to renew the thanks of Madame Danglars which had already been conveyed to the Count through the medium of a letter, signed Baron Danglars, née Hermine de Servieux. Albert was accompanied by Lucien Debray, who, joining his friend's conversation, added some passing compliments, the source of which the Count's talent for finesse easily enabled him to guess. He was convinced that Lucien's visit was due to a double feeling of curiosity, the larger half of which sentiment emanated from the Rue de la Chaussée d'Antin. In short, Madame Danglars, not being personally able to examine in detail the domestic economy and household arrangements of a man who gave away horses worth 30,000 francs, and who went to the opera with a Greek slave wearing diamonds to the amount of 1,000,000 of money, had deputed these eyes, by which she was accustomed to see, to give her a faithful account of the mode of life of this incomprehensible person. But the Count did not appear to suspect that there could be the slightest connection between Lucien's visit and the curiosity of the Baroness. "You are in constant communication with the Baron Danglars?" the Count inquired of Albert de Morcerf. "Yes, Count, you know what I told you." "All remains the same, then, in that quarter?" "It is more than ever a settled thing," said Lucien, and considering that this remark was all that he was at that time called upon to make, he adjusted the glass to his eye, and biting the top of his gold-headed cane, began to make a tour of the apartment, examining the arms and the pictures. "Ah," said Monte Cristo, "I did not expect that the affair would be so promptly concluded." "Oh, things take their course without our assistance. While we are forgetting them, they are falling into their appointed order, and when again our attention is directed to them, we are surprised at the progress they have made toward the proposed end. My father and Monsieur Danglars served together in Spain, my father in the army, and Monsieur Danglars in the commissariat department. It was there that my father, ruined by the Revolution, and Monsieur Danglars, who had never possessed any patrimony, both laid the foundations of their different fortunes." "Yes," said Monte Cristo, "I think Monsieur Danglars mentioned that in a visit which I paid him. And," continued he, casting a side glance at Lucien, who was turning over the leaves of an album, "Mademoiselle Eugénie is pretty. I think I remember that to be her name." "Very pretty," replied Albert, "or rather very beautiful, but of that style of beauty which I do not appreciate. I am an ungrateful fellow." "You speak as if you were already her husband." "Ah," returned Albert, in his turn looking around to see what Lucien was doing. "Really," said Monte Cristo, lowering his voice, "you do not appear to me to be very enthusiastic on the subject of this marriage." "Mademoiselle Danglars is too rich for me," replied Morcerf, "and that frightens me." "Bah!" exclaimed Monte Cristo, "that's a fine reason to give. Are you not rich yourself?" "My father's income is about 50,000 francs per annum, and he will give me, perhaps, 10 or 12,000 when I marry." "That, perhaps, might not be considered a large sum, in Paris especially," said the Count, "but everything does not depend on wealth, and it is a fine thing to have a good name, and to occupy a high station in society. Your name is celebrated, your position magnificent, and then the Comte de Morcerf is a soldier, and it is pleasing to see the integrity of a Bayard united to the poverty of a Du Guesclin. Disinterestedness is the brightest ray in which a noble sword can shine. As for me, I consider the union with Mademoiselle Danglars a most suitable one. She will enrich you, and you will ennoble her." Albert shook his head and looked thoughtful. "There is still something else," said he. "I confess," observed Monte Cristo, "that I have some difficulty in comprehending your objection to a young lady who is both rich and beautiful." "Oh," said Morcerf, "this repugnance, if repugnance it may be called, is not all on my side." "Whence can it arise, then? For you told me your father desired the marriage." "It is my mother who dissents. She has a clear and penetrating judgment, and does not smile upon the proposed union. I cannot account for it, but she seems to entertain some prejudice against the Danglars." "Ah," said the Count, in a somewhat forced tone, "that may be easily explained. The Comtesse de Morcerf, who is aristocracy and refinement itself, does not relish the idea of being allied to your marriage with one of ignoble birth. That is natural enough." "I do not know if that is her reason," said Albert, "but one thing I do know, that if this marriage be consummated, it will render her quite miserable. There was to have been a meeting 6 weeks ago in order to talk over and settle the affair, but I had such a sudden attack of indisposition." "Real?" interrupted the count, smiling. "Oh, real enough, from anxiety, doubtless. At any rate, they postponed the matter for 2 months. There is no hurry, you know. I am not yet 21, and Eugénie is only 17, but the 2 months expire next week. It must be done. My dear count, you cannot imagine how my mind is harassed. How happy you are in being exempt from all this." "Well, and why should not you be free too? What prevents you from being so?" "Oh, it will be too great a disappointment to my father if I do not marry Mademoiselle Danglars." "Marry her, then," said the count, with a significant shrug of the shoulders. Yes," replied Morcerf, "but that will plunge my mother into positive grief." "Then do not marry her," said the count. "Well, I shall see. I will try and think over what is the best thing to be done. You will give me your advice, will you not, and if possible extricate me from my unpleasant position? I think rather than give pain to my dear mother I would run the risk of offending the count." Monte Cristo turned away. He seemed moved by this last remark. "Ah," said he to Debray, who had thrown himself into an easy-chair at the furthest extremity of the salon, and who held a pencil in his right hand and an account-book in his left, "what are you doing there? Are you making a sketch after Poussin?" "Oh, no," was the tranquil response. "I am too fond of art to attempt anything of that sort. I am doing a little sum in arithmetic." "In arithmetic?" "Yes, I am calculating. By the way, Morcerf, that indirectly concerns you. I am calculating what the house of Danglars must have gained by the last rise in Hayti bonds. From 206 they have risen to 409 in 3 days, and the prudent banker had purchased at 206. Therefore he must have made 300,000 livres." "That is not his biggest scoop," said Morcerf. "Did he not make 1,000,000 in Spaniards this last year?" "My dear fellow," said Lucien, "here is the Count of Monte Cristo, who will say to you, as the Italians do, 'Money and sanctity each in a moiety.' When they tell me such things, I only shrug my shoulders and say nothing." "But you were speaking of Haytians," said Monte Cristo. "Ah, Haytians, that is quite another thing. Haytians are the écarté of French stock-jobbing. We may like bouillotte, delight in whist, be enraptured with Boston, and yet grow tired of them all, but we always come back to écarté. It is not only a game, it is an hors d'oeuvre. Monsieur Danglars sold yesterday at 405, and pockets 300,000 francs. Had he but waited to today, the price would have fallen to 205, and instead of gaining 300,000 francs, he would have lost 20 or 25,000. "And what has caused the sudden fall from 409 to 206?" asked Monte Cristo. "I am profoundly ignorant of all these stock-jobbing intrigues." "Because," said Albert, laughing, "one piece of news follows another, and there is often great dissimilarity between them." "Ah," said the count, "I see that Monsieur Danglars is accustomed to play at gaining or losing 300,000 francs in a day. He must be enormously rich." "It is not he who plays," exclaimed Lucien. "It is Madame Danglars. She is indeed daring." "But you, who are a reasonable being, Lucien, and who know how little dependence is to be placed on the news, since you are at the fountainhead, surely you ought to prevent it," said Morcerf with a smile. "How can I, if her husband fails in controlling her?" asked Lucien. "You know the character of the baroness. No one has any influence with her, and she does precisely what she pleases." "Ah, if I were in your place," said Albert. "Well?" "I would reform her. It would be rendering a service to her future son-in-law." "How would you set about it?" "Ah, that would be easy enough. I would give her a lesson." "A lesson?" "Yes, your position as secretary to the minister renders your authority great on the subject of political news. You never open your mouth, but the stockbrokers immediately stenograph your words. Cause her to lose 100,000 francs, and that would teach her prudence." "I do not understand," stammered Lucien. "It is very clear, notwithstanding," replied the young man, with an artlessness wholly free from affectation. "Tell her some fine morning an unheard-of piece of intelligence, some telegraphic despatch of which you alone are in possession. For instance, that Henri IV. Was seen yesterday at Gabriel's. That would boom the market. She will buy heavily, and she will certainly lose when Beauchamp announces the following day, in his Gazette, the report circulated by some usually well-informed persons that the king was seen yesterday at Gabriel's house is totally without foundation. We can positively assert that his Majesty did not quit the Pont Neuf." Lucien half smiled. Monte Cristo, although apparently indifferent, had not lost one word of this conversation, and his penetrating eye had even read a hidden secret in the embarrassed manner of the secretary. This embarrassment had completely escaped Albert, but it caused Lucien to shorten his visit. He was evidently ill at ease. The count, in taking leave of him, said something in a low voice, to which he answered, "Willingly, count, I accept." The count returned to young Morcerf. "Do you not think, on reflection," he said to him, "that you have done wrong in speaking thus of your mother-in-law in the presence of Monsieur Debray?" "My dear count," said Morcerf, "I beg of you not to apply that title so prematurely." Now, speaking without any exaggeration, is your mother really so very much averse to this marriage?" "So much so that the Baroness very rarely comes to the house, and my mother has not, I think, visited Madame Danglars twice in her whole life." "Then," said the Count, "I am emboldened to speak openly to you. Monsieur Danglars is my banker. Monsieur de Villefort has overwhelmed me with politeness in return for a service which a casual piece of good fortune enabled me to render him. I predict from all this an avalanche of dinners and routs. Now, in order not to presume on this, and also to be beforehand with them, I have, if agreeable to you, thought of inviting Monsieur and Madame Danglars and Monsieur and Madame de Villefort to my country house at Auteuil. If I were to invite you and the Count and Countess of Morcerf to this dinner, I should give it the appearance of being a matrimonial meeting, or at least Madame de Morcerf would look upon the affair in that light, especially if Baron Danglars did me the honor to bring his daughter. In that case your mother would hold me in aversion, and I do not at all wish that. On the contrary, I desire to stand high in her esteem." "Indeed, Count," said Morcerf, "I thank you sincerely for having used so much candor toward me, and I gratefully accept the exclusion which you propose. You say you desire my mother's good opinion. I assure you it is already yours to a very unusual extent." "Do you think so?" said Monte Cristo with interest. "I am sure of it. We talked of you an hour after you left us the other day. But to return to what we were saying. If my mother could know of this attention on your part, and I will venture to tell her, I am sure that she will be most grateful to you. It is true that my father will be equally angry." The Count laughed. "Well," said he to Morcerf, "but I think your father will not be the only angry one. Monsieur and Madame Danglars will think me a very ill-mannered person. They know that I am intimate with you, that you are, in fact, one of the oldest of my Parisian acquaintances, and they will not find you at my house. They will certainly ask me why I did not invite you. Be sure to provide yourself with some previous engagement which shall have some semblance of probability, and communicate the fact to me by a line in writing. You know that with bankers nothing but a written document will be valid." "I wish to do better than that," said Albert. "My mother is wishing to go to the seaside. What day is fixed for your dinner?" "Saturday." "This is Tuesday. Well, tomorrow evening we leave, and the day after we shall be at Tréport. Really, Count, you have a delightful way of setting people at their ease." "Indeed, you give me more credit than I deserve. I only wish to do what will be agreeable to you, that is all." "When shall you send your invitations?" "This very day." "Well, I will immediately call on Monsieur Danglars, and tell him that my mother and myself must leave Paris tomorrow. I have not seen you, consequently I know nothing of your dinner." "How foolish you are! Have you forgotten that Monsieur Debray has just seen you at my house?" "Ah, true. Fix it this way. I have seen you and invited you without any ceremony, when you instantly answered that it would be impossible for you to accept, as you were going to Tréport. Well, then, that is settled, but you will come and call on my mother before tomorrow." "Before tomorrow? That will be a difficult matter to arrange. Besides, I shall just be in the way of all the preparations for departure." "Well, you can do better. You were only a charming man before, but if you accede to my proposal, you will be adorable." "What must I do to obtain such sublimity?" "You are today as free as air. Come and dine with me. We shall be a small party, only yourself, my mother, and I. You have scarcely seen my mother. You shall have an opportunity of observing her more closely. She is a remarkable woman, and I only regret that there does not exist another like her, about 20 years younger. In that case, I assure you there would very soon be a countess and a viscountess of Morcerf. As to my father, you will not see him. He is officially engaged, and dines with the chief referendary. We will talk over our travels, and you, who have seen the whole world, will relate your adventures. You shall tell us the history of the beautiful Greek who was with you the other night at the opera, and whom you call your slave and yet treat like a princess. We will talk Italian and Spanish. Come, accept my invitation, and my mother will thank you." "A thousand thanks," said the count. "Your invitation is most gracious, and I regret exceedingly that it is not in my power to accept it. I am not so much at liberty as you suppose. On the contrary, I have a most important engagement." "Ah, take care. You were teaching me just now how, in case of an invitation to dinner, one might creditably make an excuse. I require the proof of a pre-engagement. I am not a banker like Monsieur Danglars, but I am quite as incredulous as he is." "I am going to give you a proof," replied the count, and he rang the bell. "Humph!" said Morcerf. "It is the second time that you have refused to dine with my mother. It is evident that you wish to avoid her." Monte Cristo started. "Oh, you do not mean that," said he. "Besides, here comes the confirmation of my assertion." Baptistine entered, and remained standing at the door. "I had no previous knowledge of your visit, had I?" "Indeed, you are such an extraordinary person that I would not answer for it." "At all events, I could not guess that you would invite me to dinner." "Probably not." "Well, listen, Baptistine, what did I tell you this morning when I called you into my laboratory?" "To close the door against visitors as soon as the clock struck 5," replied the valet. "What then?" "Ah, my dear count," said Albert. "No, no, I wish to do away with that mysterious reputation that you've given me, my dear viscount. It is tiresome to be always acting Manfred. I wish my life to be free and open. Go on, Baptistine." "Then to admit no one except Major Bartolomeo Cavalcanti and his son." "You hear? Major Bartolomeo Cavalcanti, a man who ranks among the most ancient nobility of Italy, whose name Dante has celebrated in the 10th canto of the Inferno. You remember it, do you not? Then there is his son, Andrea, a charming young man, about your own age, viscount, bearing the same title as yourself, and who is making his entry into the Parisian world, aided by his father's millions. The major will bring his son with him this evening, the contino, as we say in Italy. He confides him to my care. If he proves himself worthy of it, I will do what I can to advance his interests. You will assist me in the work, will you not?" "Most undoubtedly. This Major Cavalcanti is an old friend of yours, then?" "By no means. He is a perfect nobleman, very polite, modest, and agreeable, such as may be found constantly in Italy, descendants of very ancient families. I have met him several times at Florence, Bologna, and Lucca, and now he has communicated to me the fact of his arrival in Paris. The acquaintances one makes in traveling have a sort of claim on one. They everywhere expect to receive the same attention which you once paid them by chance, as though the civilities of a passing hour were likely to awaken any lasting interest in favor of the man in whose society you may happen to be thrown in the course of your journey. This good Major Cavalcanti is coming to take a second view of Paris, which he only saw in passing through in the time of the Empire, when he was on his way to Moscow. I shall give him a good dinner, he will confide his son to my care, and I will promise to watch over him. I shall let him follow in whatever path his folly may lead him, and then I shall have done my part." "Certainly, I see you are a model mentor," said Albert. "Good-bye, we shall return on Sunday. By the way, I have received news of Franz." "Have you? Is he still amusing himself in Italy?" "I believe so. However, he regrets your absence extremely. He says you were the sun of Rome, and that without you all appears dark and cloudy. I do not know if he does not even go so far as to say that it rains." "His opinion of me is altered for the better, then?" "No, he still persists in looking upon you as the most incomprehensible and mysterious of beings." "He is a charming young man," said Monte Cristo, "and I felt a lively interest in him the very first evening of my introduction, when I met him in search of a supper, and prevailed upon him to accept a portion of mine. He is, I think, the son of General d'Épinay?" "He is." "The same who was so shamefully assassinated in 1815." "By the Bonapartists?" "Yes. Really, I like him extremely. Is there not also a matrimonial engagement contemplated for him?" "Yes, he is to marry Mademoiselle de Villefort." "Indeed!" "And you know I am to marry Mademoiselle Danglars," said Albert, laughing. "You smile?" "Yes." "Why do you do so?" "I smile because there appears to me to be about as much inclination for the consummation of the engagement in question as there is for my own. But really, my dear count, we are talking as much of women as they do of us. It is unpardonable." Albert rose. "Are you going?" "Oh, really, that is a good idea. 2 hours have I been boring you to death with my company, and then you, with the greatest politeness, ask me if I'm going. Indeed, count, you are the most polished man in the world. And your servants, too, how very well behaved they are! There is quite a style about them. Monsieur Baptistine especially. I never could get such a man as that. My servants seem to imitate those you sometimes see in a play, who, because they have only a word or two to say, acquit themselves in the most awkward manner possible. Therefore, if you part with Monsieur Baptistine, give me the refusal of him." "By all means." "That is not all. Give my compliments to your illustrious Lucanese, Cavalcante of the Cavalcante, and if by any chance he should be willing to establish his son, find him a wife very rich, very noble on her mother's side at least, and a baroness in right of her father. I will help you in the search." "Ah, you will do as much as that, will you?" "Yes." "Well, really, nothing is certain in this world." "Oh, Count, what a service you might render me! I should like you 100 times better if by your intervention I could remain a bachelor, even if it were only for 10 years." "Nothing is impossible," gravely replied Monte Cristo, and taking leave of Albert he returned into the house, and struck the gong 3 times. Bertuccio appeared. "Monsieur Bertuccio, you understand that I intend entertaining company on Saturday at Auteuil." Bertuccio slightly started. "I shall require your services to see that all be properly arranged. It is a beautiful house, or at all events may be made so." "There must be a good deal done before it can deserve that title, your excellency, for the tapestried hangings are very old." "Let them all be taken away and changed then, with the exception of the sleeping chamber, which is hung with red damask. You will leave that exactly as it is." Bertuccio bowed. "You will not touch the garden either. As to the yard, you may do what you please with it. I should prefer that being altered beyond all recognition." "I will do everything in my power to carry out your wishes, your excellency. I should be glad, however, to receive your excellency's commands concerning the dinner." "Really, my dear Monsieur Bertuccio," said the count, "since you have been in Paris you have become quite nervous, and apparently out of your element. You no longer seem to understand me." "But surely your excellency will be so good as to inform me who you are expecting to receive." "I do not yet know myself, neither is it necessary that you should do so. Lucullus dines with Lucullus. That is quite sufficient." Bertuccio bowed and left the room. End of Chapter 54.
Now, as I have never known any Sinbad, with the exception of the one celebrated in the 1001 Nights. Well, it is one of his descendants, and a great friend of mine. He is a very rich Englishman, eccentric almost to insanity, and his real name is Lord Wilmore. "Ah, indeed! Then that explains everything that is extraordinary," said André. "He is, then, the same Englishman whom I met at... yes, indeed. Well, monsieur, I am at your service." "If what you say is true," replied the count, smiling, "perhaps you will be kind enough to give me some account of yourself and your family?" "Certainly I will do so," said the young man, with a quickness which gave proof of his ready invention. "I am, as you have said, the Count Andrea Cavalcanti, son of Major Bartolomeo Cavalcanti, a descendant of the Cavalcanti whose names are inscribed in the Golden Book at Florence. Our family, although still rich, for my father's income amounts to 500,000, has experienced many misfortunes, and I myself was, at the age of 5 years, taken away by the treachery of my tutor, so that for 15 years I have not seen the author of my existence. Since I have arrived at years of discretion and become my own master, I have been constantly seeking him, but all in vain. At length I received this letter from your friend, which states that my father is in Paris, and authorizes me to address myself to you for information respecting him." "Really, all you have related to me is exceedingly interesting," said Monte Cristo, observing the young man with a gloomy satisfaction, "and you have done well to confirm in everything to the wishes of my friend Sinbad, for your father is indeed here, and is seeking you." The count, from the moment of first entering the drawing-room, had not once lost sight of the expression of the young man's countenance. He had admired the assurance of his look and the firmness of his voice, but at these words, so natural in themselves, "Your father is indeed here, and is seeking you," young Andrea started, and exclaimed, "My father? Is my father here?" "Most undoubtedly," replied Monte Cristo. "Your father, Major Bartolomeo Cavalcanti." The expression of terror which for the moment had overspread the features of the young man had now disappeared. "Ah, yes, that is the name, certainly. Major Bartolomeo Cavalcanti. And you really mean to say, monsieur, that my dear father is here?" "Yes, sir. And I can even add that I have only just left his company. The history which he related to me of his lost son touched me to the quick. Indeed, his griefs, hopes, and fears on that subject might furnish material for a most touching and pathetic poem. At length he one day received a letter, stating that the abductors of his son now offered to restore him, or at least to give notice where he might be found, on condition of receiving a large sum of money by way of ransom. Your father did not hesitate an instant, and the sum was sent to the frontier of Piedmont, with a passport signed for Italy. You were in the south of France, I think?" "Yes," replied Andrea with an embarrassed air, "I was in the south of France." "A carriage was to await you at Nice?" "Precisely so, and it conveyed me from Nice to Genoa, from Genoa to Turin, and from Turin to Chambéry, from Chambéry to Pont de Beauvoisin, and from Pont de Beauvoisin to Paris." "Indeed? Then your father ought to have met with you on the road, for it is exactly the same route which he himself took, and that is how we have been able to trace your journey to this place." "But," said Andrea, "if my father had met me, I doubt if he would have recognised me. I must be somewhat altered since he last saw me." "Oh, the voice of nature," said Monte Cristo. "True," interrupted the young man, "I had not looked upon it in that light." "Now," replied Monte Cristo, "there is only one source of uneasiness left in your father's mind, which is this. He is anxious to know how you have been employed during your long absence from him, how you have been treated by your persecutors, and if they have conducted themselves towards you with all the deference due to your rank. Finally, he is anxious to see if you have been fortunate enough to escape the bad moral influence to which you have been exposed, and which is infinitely more to be dreaded than any physical suffering. He wishes to discover if the fine abilities with which nature has endowed you have been weakened by want of culture, and in short whether you consider yourself capable of resuming and retaining in the world the high position to which your rank entitles you." "Sir!" exclaimed the young man, quite astounded, "I hope no false report. As for myself, I first heard you spoken of by my friend Wilmore, the philanthropist. I believe he found you in some unpleasant position, but do not know of what nature, for I did not ask, not being inquisitive. Your misfortunes engaged his sympathies, so you see you must have been interesting. He told me that he was anxious to restore you to the position which you had lost, and that he would seek your father until he found him. He did seek, and has found him, apparently, since he is here now. And finally, my friend apprised me of your coming and gave me a few other instructions relative to your future fortune. I am quite aware that my friend Wilmore is peculiar, but he is sincere, and as rich as a gold mine. Consequently, he may indulge his eccentricities without any fear of their ruining him, and I have promised to adhere to his instructions. Now, sir, pray do not be offended at the question I am about to put to you, as it comes in the way of my duty as your patron. I would wish to know if the misfortunes which have happened to you, misfortunes entirely beyond your control, and which in no degree diminish my regard for you, I would wish to know if they have not, in some measure, contributed to render you a stranger to the world in which your fortune and your name entitle you to make a conspicuous figure." "Sir," returned the young man, with a reassurance of manner, "make your mind easy on this score. Those who took me from my father, and who always intended, sooner or later, to sell me again to my original proprietor, as they have now done, calculated that, in order to make the most of their bargain, it would be politic to leave me in possession of all my personal and hereditary worth, and even to increase the value if possible. I have therefore received a very good education, and have been treated by those kidnappers very much as the slaves were treated in Asia Minor, whose masters made them grammarians, doctors, and philosophers, in order that they might fetch a higher price on the Roman market." Monte Cristo smiled with satisfaction. It appeared as if he had not expected so much from Monsieur Andrea Cavalcanti. "Besides," continued the young man, "if there did appear some defect in education, or offence against the established forms of etiquette, I suppose it would be excused in consideration of the misfortunes which accompanied my birth and followed me through my youth." "Well," said Monte Cristo in an indifferent tone, "you will do as you please, Count, for you are the master of your own actions, and are the person most concerned in the matter. But if I were you, I would not divulge a word of these adventures. Your history is quite a romance, and the world, which delights in romances in yellow covers, strangely mistrusts those which are bound in living parchment, even though they be gilded like yourself. This is the kind of difficulty which I wish to represent to you, my dear Count. You would hardly have recited your touching history before it would go forth to the world and be deemed unlikely and unnatural. You would be no longer a lost child found, but you would be looked upon as an upstart, who had sprung up like a mushroom in the night. You might excite a little curiosity, but it is not everyone who likes to be made the centre of observation and the subject of unpleasant remark." I agree with you, monsieur, said the young man, turning pale and, in spite of himself, trembling beneath the scrutinising look of his companion. Such consequences would be extremely unpleasant. Nevertheless, you must not exaggerate the evil, said Monte Cristo, for by endeavouring to avoid one fault, you will fall into another. You must resolve upon one simple and single line of conduct, and for a man of your intelligence, this plan is as easy as it is necessary. You must form honourable friendships, and by that means counteract the prejudice which may attach to the obscurity of your former life. Andrea visibly changed countenance. I would offer myself as your surety and friendly adviser, said Monte Cristo, did I not possess a moral distrust of my best friends, and a sort of inclination to lead others to doubt them too. Therefore, in departing from this rule, I should, as the actors say, be playing a part quite out of my line, and should therefore run the risk of being hissed, which would be an act of folly. However, your Excellency, said Andrea, in consideration of Lord Wilmore, by whom I was recommended to you— Yes, certainly, interrupted Monte Cristo. But Lord Wilmore did not omit to inform me, my dear Monsieur Andrea, that the season of your youth was rather a stormy one. Ah, said the Count, watching Andrea's countenance, I do not demand any confession from you. It is precisely to avoid that necessity that your father was sent for from Lucca. You shall soon see him. He is a little stiff and pompous in his manner, and he is disfigured by his uniform, but when it becomes known that he has been for 18 years in the Austrian service, all that will be pardoned. We are not generally very severe with the Austrians. In short, you will find your father a very presentable person, I assure you. Ah, sir, you have given me confidence. It is so long since we were separated that I have not the least remembrance of him. And besides, you know that, in the eyes of the world, a large fortune covers all defects. He is a millionaire. His income is 500,000 francs. Then, said the young man with anxiety, I shall be sure to be placed in an agreeable position. One of the most agreeable possible, my dear sir. He will allow you an income of 50,000 livres per annum during the whole time of your stay in Paris. Then in that case I shall always choose to remain there. You cannot control circumstances, my dear sir. Man proposes, and God disposes. Andrea sighed. But, said he, so long as I do remain in Paris, and nothing forces me to quit it, do you mean to tell me that I may rely on receiving the sum you just now mentioned to me? You may. Shall I receive it from my father? asked Andrea, with some uneasiness. Yes, you will receive it from your father personally, but Lord Wilmore will be the security for the money. He has, at the request of your father, opened an account of 6,000 francs a month at Monsieur Danglars', which is one of the safest banks in Paris. And does my father mean to remain long in Paris? asked Andrea. Only a few days, replied Monte Cristo. His service does not allow him to absent himself more than 2 or 3 weeks together. Ah, my dear father, exclaimed Andrea, evidently charmed with the idea of his speedy departure. Therefore, said Monte Cristo, feigning to mistake his meaning, therefore I will not for another instant retard the pleasure of your meeting. Are you prepared to embrace your worthy father? I hope you do not doubt it. Go, then, into the drawing-room, my young friend, where you will find your father awaiting you. Andrea made a low bow to the Count and entered the adjoining room. Monte Cristo watched him till he disappeared, and then touched a spring in a panel made to look like a picture, which, in sliding partly from the frame, discovered to view a small opening, so cleverly contrived that it revealed all that was passing in the drawing-room now occupied by Cavalcanti and Andrea. The young man closed the door behind him and advanced towards the Major, who had risen when he heard steps approaching him. "Ah, my dear father," said Andrea in a loud voice, in order that the Count might hear him in the next room. "Is it really you?" "How do you do, my dear son?" said the Major gravely. "After so many years of painful separation," said Andrea in the same tone of voice, and glancing towards the door, "what a happiness it is to meet again!" "Indeed it is, after so long a separation." "Will you not embrace me, sir?" said Andrea. "If you wish it, my son," said the Major, and the two men embraced each other after the fashion of actors on the stage. That is to say, each rested his head on the other's shoulder. "Then we are once more reunited," said Andrea. "Once more," replied the Major. "Never more to be separated?" "Why, as to that, I think, my dear son, you must be by this time so accustomed to France as to look upon it almost as a second country." "The fact is," said the young man, "that I should be exceedingly grieved to leave it." "As for me, you must know I cannot possibly live out of Lucca. Therefore I shall return to Italy as soon as I can." "But before you leave France, my dear father, I hope you will put me in possession of the documents which will be necessary to prove my descent." "Certainly. I am come expressly on that account. It has cost me much trouble to find you, but I had resolved on giving them into your hands, and if I had to recommence my search, it would occupy all the few remaining years of my life." "Where are these papers, then?" "Here they are." André seized the certificate of his father's marriage and his own baptismal register, and after having opened them with all the eagerness which might be expected under the circumstances, he read them with a facility which proved that he was accustomed to similar documents, and with an expression which plainly denoted an unusual interest in the contents. When he had perused the documents, an indefinable expression of pleasure lightened up his countenance, and, looking at the Major with a most peculiar smile, he said in very excellent Tuscan, "Then there is no longer any such thing in Italy as being condemned to the galleys?" The Major drew himself up to his full height. "Why, what do you mean by that question?" "I mean that if there were, it would be impossible to draw up with impunity two such deeds as these. In France, my dear sir, half such a piece of effrontery as that would cause you to be quickly dispatched to Toulon for 5 years for change of air." "Will you be good enough to explain your meaning?" said the Major, endeavouring as much as possible to assume an air of the greatest majesty. "My dear Monsieur Cavalcanti," said André, taking the Major by the arm in a confidential manner, "how much are you paid for being my father?" The Major was about to speak when André continued in a low voice, "Nonsense. I am going to set you an example of confidence. They give me 50,000 francs a year to be your son. Consequently, you can understand that it is not at all likely I shall ever deny my parent." The Major looked anxiously around him. "Make yourself easy, we are quite alone," said André. "Besides, we are conversing in Italian." "Well, then," replied the Major, "they paid me 50,000 francs down." "Monsieur Cavalcanti," said André, "do you believe in fairy tales?" "I used not to do so, but I really feel now almost obliged to have faith in them." "You have, then, been induced to alter your opinion? You have had some proofs of their truth?" The Major drew from his pocket a handful of gold. "Most palpable proofs," said he, "as you may perceive." "You think, then, that I may rely on the Count's promises?" "Certainly I do." "You are sure he will keep his word with me?" "To the letter, but at the same time, remember, we must continue to play our respective parts. I as a tender father, "And I as a dutiful son, as they choose that I shall be descended from you."
"Whom do you mean by they?"
"Ma foi, I can hardly tell, but I was alluding to those who wrote the letter. You received one, did you not?"
"Yes."
"From whom?"
"From a certain Abbé Busoni."
"Have you any knowledge of him?"
"No, I have never seen him."
"What did he say in the letter?"
"You will promise not to betray me."
"Rest assured of that. You well know that our interests are the same."
"Then read for yourself."
And the Major gave a letter into the young man's hand. André read in a low voice, "You are poor. A miserable old age awaits you. Would you like to become rich, or at least independent? Set out immediately for Paris and demand of the Count of Monte Cristo, Avenue des Champs-Élysées, number 30, the son whom you had by the Marchesa Corsinari, and who was taken from you at 5 years of age. This son is named André Cavalcanti. In order that you may not doubt the kind intention of the writer of this letter, you will find enclosed an order for 2,400 francs, payable in Florence, at Signor Gozzi's. Also a letter of introduction to the Count of Monte Cristo, on whom I give you a draft of 48,000 francs. Remember to go to the Count on the 26th of May, at 7 o'clock in the evening. Signed, Abbé Busoni." "It is the same."
"What do you mean?"
said the Major. "I was going to say that I received a letter almost to the same effect."
"You?"
"Yes."
"From the Abbé Busoni?"
"No."
"From whom, then?"
"From an Englishman called Lord Wilmore, who takes the name of Sinbad the Sailor."
"And of whom you have no more knowledge than I of the Abbé Busoni."
"You are mistaken. There I am ahead of you."
"You have seen him, then?"
"Yes, once."
"Where?"
"Ah, that is just what I cannot tell you. If I did, I should make you as wise as myself, which it is not my intention to do."
"And what did the letter contain?"
Read it. You are poor, and your future prospects are dark and gloomy. Do you wish for a name? Should you like to be rich and your own master? Ma foi, said the young man, was it possible there could be two answers to such a question? Take the post-chaise which you will find waiting at the Porte de Gênes as you enter Nice. Pass through Turin, Chambry, and Pont de Beauvoisin. Go to the Count of Monte Cristo, Avenue des Champs-Élysées, on the 26th of May at 7 o'clock in the evening, and demand of him your father. You are the son of the Marchese Cavalcanti and the Marchesa Oliva Corsinari. The Marquis will give you some papers which will certify this fact and authorize you to appear under that name in the Parisian world. As to your rank, an annual income of 50,000 livres will enable you to support it admirably. I enclose a draft for 5,000 livres, payable on Monsieur Ferriat, banker at Nice, and also a letter of introduction to the Count of Monte Cristo, whom I have directed to supply all your wants. Sinbad the Sailor. Humph, said the Major. Very good. You have seen the Count, you say? I have only just left him. And has he conformed to all that the letter specified? He has. Do you understand it? Not in the least. There is a dupe somewhere. At all events, it is neither you nor I. Certainly not. Well, then. Why, it does not much concern us. Do you think that it does? No, I agree with you there. We must play the game to the end, and consent to be blindfold. Ah, you shall see. I promise you I will sustain my part to admiration. I never once doubted your doing so. Monte Cristo chose this moment for re-entering the drawing-room. On hearing the sound of his footsteps, the two men threw themselves in each other's arms, and while they were in the midst of this embrace, the Count entered. Well, Marquis, said Monte Cristo, you appear to be in no way disappointed in the son whom your good fortune has restored to you. Ah, your Excellency, I am overwhelmed with delight. And what are your feelings? Said Monte Cristo, turning to the young man. As for me, my heart is overflowing with happiness. Happy father, happy son, said the Count. There is only one thing which grieves me, observed the Major, and that is the necessity for my leaving Paris so soon. Ah, my dear Monsieur Cavalcanti, I trust you will not leave before I have had the honour of presenting you to some of my friends. I am at your service, sir, replied the Major. Now, sir, said Monte Cristo, addressing André, make your confession. To whom? Tell Monsieur Cavalcanti something of the state of your finances. Ma foi, monsieur, you have touched upon a tender chord. Do you hear what he says, Major? Certainly I do. But do you understand? I do. Your son says he requires money. Well, what would you have me do? Said the Major. You should furnish him with some, of course, replied Monte Cristo. I? Yes, you, said the Count, at the same time advancing towards André and slipping a packet of banknotes into the young man's hand. What is this? It is from your father. From my father? Yes, did you not tell him just now that you wanted money? Well, then, he deputes me to give you this. Am I to consider this as part of my income on account? No, it is for the first expenses of your settling in Paris. Ah, how good my dear father is! Silence, said Monte Cristo. He does not wish you to know that it comes from him. I fully appreciate his delicacy, said André, cramming the notes hastily into his pocket. And now, gentlemen, I wish you good morning, said Monte Cristo. And when may we have the honour of seeing you again, your Excellency? asked Cavalcanti. Ah, said André, when may we hope for that pleasure? On Saturday, if you will. Yes. Let me see. Saturday. I am to dine at my country house at Auteuil on that day, Rue de la Fontaine, number 28. Several persons are invited, and, among others, Monsieur Danglars, your banker. I will introduce you to him, for it will be necessary he should know you, as he is to pay your money. Full dress? said the Major, half aloud. Oh, yes, certainly, said the Count. Uniform, cross, knee breeches. And how shall I be dressed? demanded André. Oh, very simply. Black trousers, patent leather boots, white waistcoat, either a black or blue coat, and a long cravat. Go to Blin or Veronique for your clothes. Baptistin will tell you where if you do not know their address. The less pretension there is in your attire, the better will be the effect, as you are a rich man. If you mean to buy any horses, get them at Devedot, and if you purchase a phaeton, go to Baptiste for it. At what hour shall we come? asked the young man. About 6:30. We will be with you at that time, said the Major. The two Cavalcanti bowed to the Count and left the house. Monte Cristo went to the window and saw them crossing the street, arm in arm. "There go two miscreants," said he. "It is a pity they are not really related." Then, after an instant of gloomy reflection, "Come, I will go to see the Morels," said he. "I think that disgust is even more sickening than hatred." End of chapter 56.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Dan Three Trees. The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas, Chapter 67. At the Office of the King's Attorney. Let us leave the banker, driving his horses at their fullest speed, and follow Madame Danglars in her morning excursion. We have said that at 12:30 o'clock Madame Danglars had ordered her horses, and had left home in the carriage. She directed her course toward the Faubourg Saint-Germain, went down the Rue Mazarine, and stopped at the Passage du Pont-Neuf. She descended, and went through the passage. She was very plainly dressed, as would be the case with a woman of taste walking in the morning. At the Rue Guénégaud she called a cab, and directed the driver to go to the Rue de Harlay. As soon as she was seated in the vehicle, she drew from her pocket a very thick black veil, which she tied on to her straw bonnet. She then replaced the bonnet, and saw with pleasure, in a little pocket mirror, that her white complexion and brilliant eyes were alone visible. The cab crossed the Pont-Neuf and entered the Rue de Harlay by the Place Dauphine. The driver was paid as the door opened, and stepping lightly up the stairs, Madame Danglars soon reached the Salle des Pas Perdus. There was a great deal going on that morning, and many business-like persons at the Palais. Business-like persons pay very little attention to women, and Madame Danglars crossed the hall without exciting any more attention than any other woman calling upon her lawyer. There was a great press of people in Monsieur de Villefort's antechamber, but Madame Danglars had no occasion even to pronounce her name. The instant she appeared, the doorkeeper rose, came to her, and asked her whether she was not the person with whom the procureur had made an appointment, and on her affirmative answer being given, he conducted her by a private passage to Monsieur de Villefort's office. The magistrate was seated in an armchair, writing, with his back towards the door. He did not move as he heard it open, and the doorkeeper pronounced the words, "Walk in, madame," and then reclose it. But no sooner had the man's footsteps ceased than he started up, drew the bolts, closed the curtains, and examined every corner of the room. Then, when he had assured himself that he could neither be seen nor heard, and was consequently relieved of doubts, he said, "Thanks, madame, thanks for your punctuality." And he offered a chair to Madame Danglars, which she accepted, for her heart beat so violently that she felt nearly suffocated. "It is a long time, madame," said the procureur, describing a half-circle with his chair so as to place himself exactly opposite to Madame Danglars. "It is a long time since I had the pleasure of speaking alone with you, and I regret that we have only now met to enter upon a painful conversation." "Nevertheless, sir, you see I have answered your first appeal, although certainly the conversation must be much more painful for me than for you." Villefort smiled bitterly. "It is true, then," he said, rather uttering his thoughts aloud than addressing his companion. "It is true, then, that all our actions leave their traces, some sad, some bright, on our paths. It is true that every step in our lives is like the course of an insect on the sands. It leaves its track. Alas! To many the path is traced by tears." "Sir," said Madame Danglars, "you can feel for my emotion, can you not? Spare me then, I beseech you. When I look at this room, whence so many guilty creatures have departed, trembling and ashamed, when I look at that chair before which I now sit trembling and ashamed, oh, it requires all my reason to convince me that I am not a very guilty woman and you a menacing judge." Villefort dropped his head and sighed. "And I," he said, "I feel that my place is not in the judge's seat, but on the prisoner's stool." "You?" said Madame Danglars. "Yes, I." "I think, sir, you exaggerate your situation," said Madame Danglars, whose beautiful eyes sparkled for a moment. "The paths of which you were just speaking have been traced by all young men of ardent imaginations. Besides the pleasure, there is always remorse from the indulgence of our passions, and after all, what have you men to fear from all this? The world excuses and notoriety ennobles you. Madame, replied Villefort, you know that I am no hypocrite, or at least that I never deceive without a reason. If my brow be severe, it is because many misfortunes have clouded it. If my heart be petrified, it is that it might sustain the blows it has received. I was not so in my youth. I was not so on the night of the betrothal, when we were all seated around a table in the Rue du Coeur at Marseille. But since then, everything has changed in and about me. I am accustomed to brave difficulties, and in the conflict to crush those who, by their own free will, or by chance, voluntarily or involuntarily, interfere with me in my career. It is generally the case that what we most ardently desire is as ardently withheld from us by those who wish to obtain it, or from whom we attempt to snatch it. Thus, the greater number of a man's errors come before him disguised under the specious form of necessity. Then, after error has been committed in a moment of excitement, of delirium, or of fear, we see that we might have avoided and escaped it. The means we might have used, which we in our blindness could not see, then seem simple and easy, and we say, why did I not do this instead of that? Women, on the contrary, are rarely tormented with remorse, for the decision does not come from you. Your misfortunes are generally imposed upon you, and your faults the results of others' crimes. In any case, sir, you will allow, replied Madame Danglars, that even if the fault were mine alone, I last night received a severe punishment for it. Poor thing, said Villefort, pressing her hand. It was too severe for your strength, for you were twice overwhelmed, and yet— Well? Well, I must tell you. Collect all your courage, for you have not yet heard all. Ah! exclaimed Madame Danglars, alarmed. What is there more to hear? You only look back to the past, and it is, indeed, bad enough. Well, picture to yourself a future more gloomy still, certainly frightful, perhaps sanguinary. The Baroness knew how calm Villefort naturally was, and his present excitement frightened her so much that she opened her mouth to scream, but the sound died in her throat. How has this terrible past been recalled? Cried Villefort. How is it that it has escaped from the depths of the tomb and the recesses of our hearts where it was buried, to visit us now like a phantom, whitening our cheeks and flushing our brows with shame? Alas, said Hermine, doubtless it is chance. Chance, replied Villefort. No, no, madame, there is no such thing as chance. Oh, yes. Has not a fatal chance revealed all this? Was it not by chance the Count of Monte Cristo bought that house? Was it not by chance he caused the earth to be dug up? Is it not by chance that the unfortunate child was disinterred under the trees, that poor innocent offspring of mine, which I never even kissed, but for whom I wept many, many tears? Ah, my heart clung to the Count when he mentioned the dear spoil found beneath the flowers. Well, no, madame. This is the terrible news I have to tell you, said Villefort in a hollow voice. No, nothing was found beneath the flowers. There was no child disinterred. No. You must not weep. No, you must not groan. You must tremble. What can you mean? Asked Madame Danglars, shuddering. I mean that Monsieur de Monte Cristo, digging underneath these trees, found neither skeleton nor chest, because neither of them was there. Neither of them there? Repeated Madame Danglars, her staring, wide-open eyes expressing her alarm. Neither of them there, she said again, as though striving to impress herself with the meaning of the words which escaped her. No, said Villefort, burying his face in his hands. No, 100 times no. Then you did not bury the poor child there, sir? Why did you deceive me? Where did you place it? Tell me, where? There. But listen to me, listen, and you will pity me who has for 20 years alone borne the heavy burden of grief I am about to reveal, without casting the least portion upon you. Oh, you frighten me, but speak, I will listen. You recollect that sad night, when you were half expiring on that bed in the red damask room, while I, scarcely less agitated than you, awaited your delivery. The child was born, was given to me, motionless, breathless, voiceless. We thought it dead. Madame Danglars moved rapidly, as though she would spring from her chair, but Villefort stopped and clasped his hands as if to implore her attention. We thought it dead, he repeated. I placed it in the chest, which was to take the place of a coffin. I descended to the garden, I dug a hole, and then flung it down in haste. Scarcely had I covered it with earth, when the arm of the Corsican was stretched towards me. I saw a shadow rise, and at the same time a flash of light. I felt pain. I wished to cry out, but an icy shiver ran through my veins and stifled my voice. I felt lifeless, and fancied myself killed. Never shall I forget your sublime courage when, having returned to consciousness, I dragged myself to the foot of the stairs, and you, almost dying yourself, came to meet me. We were obliged to keep silent upon the dreadful catastrophe. You had the fortitude to regain the house, assisted by your nurse. A duel was the pretext for my wound. Though we scarcely expected it, our secret remained in our own keeping alone. I was taken to Versailles. For 3 months I struggled with death. At last, as I seemed to cling to life, I was ordered to the south. 4 men carried me from Paris to Chalons, walking 6 leagues a day. Madame de Villefort followed the litter in her carriage. At Chalons I was put upon the Saône. Thence I passed on to the Rhône, whence I descended, merely with the current, to Arles. At Arles I was again placed on my litter, and continued my journey to Marseille. My recovery lasted 6 months. I never heard you mentioned, and I did not dare inquire for you. When I returned to Paris, I learned that you, the widow of Monsieur de Nargon, had married Monsieur Danglars. What was the subject of my thoughts from the time consciousness returned to me? Always the same, always the child's corpse, coming every night in my dreams, rising from the earth, and hovering over the grave with menacing look and gesture. I inquired immediately on my return to Paris. The house had not been inhabited since we left it, but it had just been let for 9 years. I found the tenant. I pretended that I disliked the idea that a house belonging to my wife's father and mother should pass into the hands of strangers. I offered to pay them for cancelling the lease. They demanded 6,000 francs. I would have given 10,000. I would have given 20,000. I had the money with me. I made the tenant sign the deed of resolution, and when I had obtained what I so much wanted, I galloped to Auteuil. No one had entered the house since I had left it. It was 5 o'clock in the afternoon. I ascended into the Red Room and waited for night. There all the thoughts which had disturbed me during my year of constant agony came back with double force. The Corsican, who had declared the vendetta against me, who had followed me from Nîmes to Paris, who had hid himself in the garden, who had struck me, had seen me dig the grave, had seen me inter the child. He might become acquainted with your person, nay, he might even then have known it. Would he not one day make you pay for keeping this terrible secret? Would it not be a sweet revenge for him when he found that I had not died from the blow of his dagger? It was therefore necessary, before everything else, and at all risks, that I should cause all traces of the past to disappear, that I should destroy every material vestige. Too much reality would always remain in my recollection. It was for this I had annulled the lease. It was for this I had come. It was for this I was waiting. Night arrived. I allowed it to become quite dark. I was without a light in that room. When the wind shook all the doors, behind which I continually expected to see some spy concealed, I trembled. I seemed everywhere to hear your moans behind me in the bed, and I dared not turn around. My heart beat so violently that I feared my wound would open. At length, one by one, all the noises in the neighborhood ceased. I understood that I had nothing to fear, that I should neither be seen nor heard, so I decided upon descending to the garden. Listen, Hermine. I consider myself as brave as most men, but when I drew from my breast the little key of the staircase, which I had found in my coat, that little key we both used to cherish so much, which you wished to have fastened to a golden ring, when I opened the door and saw the pale moon shedding a long stream of white light on the spiral staircase like a spectre, I leaned against the wall and nearly shrieked. I seemed to be going mad. At last I mastered my agitation. I descended the staircase step by step. The only thing I could not conquer was a strange trembling in my knees. I grasped the railings. If I had relaxed my hold for a moment, I should have fallen. I reached the lower door. Outside this door a spade was placed against the wall. I took it, and advanced towards the thicket. I had provided myself with a dark lantern. In the middle of the lawn I stopped to light it. Then I continued my path. It was the end of November. All the verdure of the garden had disappeared. The trees were nothing more than skeletons with their long bony arms, and the dead leaves sounded on the gravel under my feet. My terror overcame me to such a degree as I approached the thicket that I took a pistol from my pocket and armed myself. I fancied continually that I saw the figure of the Corsican between the branches. I examined the thicket with my dark lantern. It was empty. I looked carefully around. I was indeed alone. No noise disturbed the silence but an owl, whose piercing cry seemed to be calling up the phantoms of the night. I tied my lantern to a forked branch I had noticed a year before, at the precise spot where I had stopped to dig the hole. The grass had grown very thickly there during the summer, and when autumn arrived no one had been there to mow it. Still, one place where the grass was thin attracted my attention. It evidently was there I had turned up the ground. I went to work. The hour, then, for which I had been waiting during the last year, had at length arrived. How I worked, how I hoped, how I struck every piece of turf, thinking to find some resistance to my spade. But no, I found nothing, though I had made a hole twice as large as the first. I thought I had been deceived, had mistaken the spot. I turned around, I looked at the trees, I tried to recall the details which had struck me at the time. A cold, sharp wind whistled through the leafless branches, and yet the drops fell from my forehead. I recollected that I was stabbed just as I was trampling the ground to fill up the hole. While doing so, I had leaned against a laburnum. Behind me was an artificial rockery intended to serve as a resting place for persons walking in the garden. In falling, my hand, relaxing its hold of the laburnum, felt the coldness of the stone. On my right I saw the tree, behind me the rock. I stood in the same attitude and threw myself down. I rose, and again began digging and enlarging the hole. Still I found nothing. The chest was no longer there. "The chest no longer there," murmured Madame Danglars, choking with fear. "Think not I contented myself with this one effort," continued Villefort. "No, I searched the whole thicket. I thought the assassin, having discovered the chest and supposing it to be a treasure, had intended carrying it off, but, perceiving his error, had dug another hole and deposited it there, but I could find nothing. Then the idea struck me that he had not taken these precautions and had simply thrown it in a corner. In the last case I must wait for daylight to renew my search. I remained in the room and waited. Oh, heavens! When daylight dawned, I went down again. My first visit was to the thicket. I hoped to find some traces which had escaped me in the darkness. I had turned up the earth over a surface of more than 20 feet square and a depth of 2 feet. A laborer would not have done in a day what occupied me an hour, but I could find nothing, absolutely nothing. Then I renewed the search. Supposing it had been thrown aside, it would probably be on the path which led to the little gate. But this examination was as useless as the first, and with a bursting heart I returned to the thicket, which now contained no hope for me. "Oh," cried Madame Danglars, "it was enough to drive you mad." "I hoped for a moment that it might," said Villefort, "but that happiness was denied me. However, recovering my strength and my ideas, 'Why,' said I, 'should that man have carried away the corpse?' "'But you said,' replied Madame Danglars, 'he would require it as a proof.' "'Ah, no, madame, that could not be. Dead bodies are not kept a year. They are shown to a magistrate, and the evidence is taken. Now nothing of the kind has happened." "What then?" asked Hermine, trembling violently. "Something more terrible, more fatal, more alarming for us. The child was, perhaps, alive, and the assassin may have saved it." Madame Danglars uttered a piercing cry, and, seizing Villefort's hands, exclaimed, "My child was alive?" said she. "You buried my child alive? You were not certain my child was dead, and you buried it? Ah!" Madame Danglars had risen, and stood before the procureur, whose hands she wrung in her feeble grasp. "I know not. I merely suppose so, as I might suppose anything else," replied Villefort with a look so fixed it indicated that his powerful mind was on the verge of despair and madness. "Ah, my child, my poor child!" cried the Baroness, falling on her chair and stifling her sobs in her handkerchief. Villefort, becoming somewhat reassured, perceived that to avert the maternal storm gathering over his head, he must inspire Madame Danglars with the terror he felt. You understand, then, that if it were so, said he, rising in his turn and approaching the Baroness to speak to her in a lower tone, we are lost. This child lives, and someone knows it lives. Someone is in possession of our secret, and since Monte Cristo speaks before us of a child disinterred, when that child could not be found, it is he who is in possession of our secret. Just God! Avenging God! Murmured Madame Danglars. Villefort's only answer was a stifled groan. But the child? The child, sir? Repeated the agitated mother. How I have searched for him, replied Villefort, wringing his hands. How I have called him in my long sleepless nights. How I have longed for royal wealth to purchase 1,000,000 of secrets from 1,000,000 of men, and to find mine among them. At last, one day, when for the 100th time I took up my spade, I asked myself again and again what the Corsican could have done with the child. A child encumbers a fugitive. Perhaps, on perceiving it was still alive, he had thrown it into the river. Impossible! Cried Madame Danglars. A man may murder another out of revenge, but he would not deliberately drown a child. Perhaps, continued Villefort, he had put it in the foundling hospital. Oh, yes, yes, cried the Baroness. My child is there. I ran to the hospital and learned that the same night, the night of the 20th of September, a child had been brought there, wrapped in part of a fine linen napkin, purposely torn in half. This portion of the napkin was marked with half a baron's crown and the letter H. Truly, truly, said Madame Danglars, all my linen is marked thus. Monsieur de Nargonne was a baronet, and my name is Hermine. Thank God, my child was not then dead. No, it was not dead. And can you tell me so without fearing to make me die of joy? Where is the child? Villefort shrugged his shoulders. Do I know? Said he. And do you believe that if I knew, I would relate to you all its trials and all its adventures, as would a dramatist or a novel writer? Alas, no, I know not. A woman, about 6 months after, came to claim it with the other half of the napkin. This woman gave all the requisite particulars, and it was entrusted to her. But you should have inquired for the woman. You should have traced her. And what do you think I did? I feigned a criminal process and employed all the most acute bloodhounds and skilful agents in search of her. They traced her to Chalons, and there they lost her. They lost her? Yes, forever. Madame Danglars had listened to this recital with a sigh, a tear, or a shriek for every detail. And this is all? Said she. And you stopped there? Oh, no, said Villefort. I never ceased to search and to inquire. However, the last 2 or 3 years I had allowed myself some respite, but now I will begin with more perseverance and fury than ever, since fear urges me, not my conscience. But, replied Madame Danglars, the Count of Monte Cristo can know nothing, or he would not seek out our society as he does. Oh, the wickedness of man is very great, said Villefort, since it surpasses the goodness of God. Did you observe that man's eyes while he was speaking to us? No. But have you ever watched him carefully? Doubtless he is capricious, but that is all. One thing alone struck me. Of all the exquisite things he placed before us, he touched nothing. I might have suspected he was poisoning us. And you see you would have been deceived. Yes, doubtless. But believe me, that man has other projects. For that reason I wish to see you, to speak to you, to warn you against everyone, but especially against him. Tell me, cried Villefort, fixing his eyes more steadfastly on her than he had ever done before, did you ever reveal to anyone our connection? Never, to anyone. You understand me, replied Villefort affectionately. When I say anyone, pardon my urgency, to anyone living, I mean. Yes, yes, I understand very well, ejaculated the Baroness. Never, I swear to you. Were you ever in the habit of writing in the evening what had transpired in the morning? Do you keep a journal? No, my life has been passed in frivolity. I wish to forget it myself. Do you talk in your sleep? I sleep soundly, like a child. Do you not remember? The color mounted to the Baroness's face, and Villefort turned awfully pale. It is true, said he, in so low a tone that he could hardly be heard. Well, said the Baroness. Well, I understand what I now have to do, replied Villefort. In less than 1 week from this time I will ascertain who this Monsieur de Monte Cristo is, whence he comes, where he goes, and why he speaks in our presence of children that have been disinterred in a garden." Villefort pronounced these words with an accent which would have made the Count shudder had he heard him. Then he pressed the hand the Baroness reluctantly gave him, and led her respectfully back to the door. Madame Danglars returned in another cab to the passage, on the other side of which she found her carriage and her coachman sleeping peacefully on the box while waiting for her. End of chapter 67.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Catherine Fitz, Davis, California, March 2007. The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 84. Beauchamp. The daring attempt to rob the Count was the topic of conversation throughout Paris for the next fortnight. The dying man had signed a deposition declaring Benedetto to be the assassin. The police had orders to make the strictest search for the murderer. Caderousse knife, dark lantern, bunch of keys, and clothing, excepting the waistcoat, which could not be found, were deposited at the registry. The corpse was conveyed to the morgue. The Count told everyone that this adventure had happened during his absence at Auteuil, and that he only knew what was related by the Abbé Bossini, who that evening, by mere chance, had requested to pass the night in his house to examine some valuable books in his library. Bertuccio alone turned pale whenever Benedetto's name was mentioned in his presence, but there was no reason why anyone should notice his doing so. Villefort, being called on to prove the crime, was preparing his brief with the same ardour that he was accustomed to exercise when required to speak in criminal cases. But 3 weeks had already passed, and the most diligent search had been unsuccessful. The attempted robbery and the murder of the robber by his comrade were almost forgotten in anticipation of the approaching marriage of Mademoiselle Danglars to the Count Andrea Cavalcanti. It was expected that this wedding would shortly take place, as the young man was received at the banker's as the betrothed. Letters had been dispatched to Monsieur Cavalcanti, as the Count's father, who highly approved of the union, regretted his inability to leave Parma at that time, and promised a wedding gift of 150,000 livres. It was agreed that the 3 millions should be entrusted to Danglars to invest. Some persons had warned the young man of the circumstances of his future father-in-law, who had of late sustained repeated losses, but with sublime disinterestedness and confidence the young man refused to listen, or to express a single doubt to the Baron. The Baron adored Count Andrea Cavalcanti. Not so Mademoiselle Eugénie Danglars. With an instinctive hatred of matrimony, she suffered Andrea's attentions in order to get rid of Morcerf, but when Andrea urged his suit, she betrayed an entire dislike to him. The Baron might possibly have perceived it, but attributing it to a caprice feigned ignorance. The delay demanded by Beauchamp had nearly expired. Morcerf appreciated the advice of Monte Cristo to let things die away of their own accord. No one had taken up the remark about the general, and no one had recognized in the officer who betrayed the castle of Yanina the noble count in the House of Peers. Albert, however, felt no less insulted. The few lines which had irritated him were certainly intended as an insult. Besides, the manner in which Beauchamp had ended the conference left a bitter recollection in his heart. He cherished the thought of the duel, hoping to conceal its true cause even from his seconds. Beauchamp had not been seen since the day he visited Albert, and those of whom the latter inquired always told him he was out on a journey which would detain him some days. Where he was, no one knew. One morning Albert was awakened by his valet de chambre, who announced Beauchamp. Albert rubbed his eyes, ordered his servant to introduce him into the small smoking room on the ground floor, dressed himself quickly, and went down. He found Beauchamp pacing the room. On perceiving him, Beauchamp stopped. "Your arrival here, without waiting my visit at your house today, looks well, sir," said Albert. "Tell me, may I shake hands with you, saying, 'Beauchamp, acknowledge you have injured me, and retain my friendship?' or must I simply propose to you a choice of arms?" "Albert," said Beauchamp, with a look of sorrow which stupefied the young man, "let us first sit down and talk." "Rather, sir, before we sit down I must demand your answer." "Albert," said the journalist, "these are questions which it is difficult to answer." "I will facilitate it by repeating the question. Will you, or will you not, retract?" "Morcerf, it is not enough to answer yes or no to questions which concern the honour, the social interest, and the life of such a man as Lieutenant General the Count of Morcerf, peer of France." "What must then be done?" "What I have done, Albert. I reasoned thus: money, time, and fatigue are nothing compared with the reputation and interests of a whole family. Probabilities will not suffice; only facts will justify a deadly combat with a friend. If I strike with the sword, or discharge the contents of a pistol at a man whom for 3 years I have been on terms of intimacy, I must at least know why I do so. I must meet him with a heart at ease, and that quiet conscience which a man needs when his own arm must save his life." "Well," said Morcerf impatiently, "what does all this mean?" "It means that I have just returned from Yanina." "From Yanina?" "Yes." "Impossible." "Here is my passport. Examine the visa: Geneva, Milan, Venice, Trieste, Gelvino, Yanina. Will you believe the government of a republic, a kingdom, and an empire?" Albert cast his eyes on the passport, then raised them in astonishment to Beauchamp. "You have been to Yanina?" said he. "Albert, had you been a stranger, a foreigner, a simple lord like that Englishman who came to demand satisfaction 3 or 4 months since, and whom I killed to get rid of, I should not have taken this trouble; but I thought this mark of consideration due to you. I took a week to go, another to return, 4 days of quarantine, and 48 hours to stay there. That makes 3 weeks. I returned last night, and here I am." "What circumlocution? How long are you before you tell me what I most wish to know?" "Because in truth, Albert—" "You hesitate?" "Yes, I fear." "You fear to acknowledge that your correspondent has deceived you? Oh, no self-love, Beauchamp. Acknowledge it, Beauchamp. Your courage cannot be doubted." "Not so," murmured the journalist. "On the contrary." Albert turned frightfully pale. He endeavoured to speak, but the words died on his lips. "My friend," said Beauchamp, in the most affectionate tone, "I should gladly make an apology, but alas!" "But what?" "The paragraph was correct, my friend." "What? That French officer?" "Yes." "Fernand?" "Yes." "The traitor who surrendered the castle of the man in whose service he was? Pardon me, my friend, that man was your father." Albert advanced furiously toward Beauchamp, but the latter restrained him more by a mild look than by his extended hand. "My friend," he said, "here is proof of it." Albert opened the paper. It was an attestation of 4 notable inhabitants of Yanina, proving that Colonel Fernand Mondego, in the service of Ali Tepelini, had surrendered the castle for 2,000,000 crowns. The signatures were perfectly legal. Albert tottered and fell overpowered in a chair. It could no longer be doubted. The family name was fully given. After a moment's mournful silence, his heart overflowed, and he gave way to a flood of tears. Beauchamp, who had watched with sincere pity the young man's paroxysm of grief, approached him. "Now, Albert," he said, "you understand me, do you not? I wish to see all, and to judge of everything for myself, hoping the explanation would be in your father's favour, and I might do him justice. But, on the contrary, the particulars which are given prove that Fernand Mondego, raised by Ali Pasha to the rank of Governor-General, is no other than Count Fernand of Morcerf. Then, recollecting the honour you had done me in admitting me to your friendship, I hastened to you." Albert, still extended on the chair, covered his face with both hands, as if to prevent the light from reaching him. "I hastened to you," continued Beauchamp, "to tell you, Albert, that in this changing age the faults of a father cannot revert upon his children. Few have passed through this revolutionary period, in the midst of which we were born, without some stain or infamy or blood to soil the uniform of the soldier or the gown of the magistrate. Now I have these proofs, Albert, and I am in your confidence, No human power can force me to a duel which your own conscience would reproach you with as criminal. But I come to offer you what you can no longer demand of me. Do you wish these proofs, these attestations, which I alone possess, to be destroyed? Do you wish this frightful secret to remain with us? Confided to me, it shall never escape my lips. Say, Albert, my friend, do you wish it? Albert threw himself on Beauchamp's neck. Ah, noble fellow, cried he. Take these, said Beauchamp, presenting the papers to Albert. Albert seized them with a convulsive hand, tore them in pieces, and trembling lest the least vestige should escape and one day appear to confront him, he approached the waxlight, always kept burning for cigars, and burned every fragment. Dear, excellent friend, murmured Albert, still burning the papers. Let all be forgotten as a sorrowful dream, said Beauchamp. Let it vanish as the last sparks from the blackened paper, and disappear as the smoke from those silent ashes. Yes, yes, said Albert, and may there remain only the eternal friendship which I promised to my deliverer, which shall be transmitted to our children's children, and shall always remind me that I owe my life and the honour of my name to you. For had this been known, O Beauchamp, I should have destroyed myself. Or, no, my poor mother, I could not have killed her by the same blow. I should have fled from my country. Dear Albert, said Beauchamp, but this sudden and factitious joy soon forsook the young man, and was succeeded by a still greater grief. Well, said Beauchamp, what still oppresses you, my friend? I am broken-hearted, said Albert. Listen, Beauchamp, I cannot thus in a moment relinquish the respect, the confidence and pride with which a father's untarnished name inspires a son. Oh, Beauchamp, Beauchamp, how shall I now approach mine? Shall I draw back my forehead from his embrace, or withhold my hand from his? I am the most wretched of men. Ah, my mother, my poor mother, said Albert, gazing through his tears at his mother's portrait. If you know this, how much you must suffer. Come, said Beauchamp, taking both his hands, take courage, my friend. But how came that first note to be inserted in your journal? Some unknown enemy, an invisible foe, has done this. The more you must fortify yourself, Albert. Let no trace of emotion be visible on your countenance. Bear your grief as the cloud bears within it ruin and death. A fatal secret, known only when the storm bursts. Go, my friend, reserve your strength for the moment when the crash shall come. You think, then, all is not over yet? Said Albert, horror-stricken. I think nothing, my friend, but all things are possible. By the way— What? Said Albert, seeing that Beauchamp hesitated. Are you going to marry Mademoiselle Danglars? Why do you ask me now? Because the rupture or fulfilment of this engagement is connected with the person of whom we were speaking. How? Said Albert. You think Monsieur Danglars— I only ask you how your engagement stands. Pray put no construction on my words that I do not mean they should convey, and give them no undue weight. No, said Albert, the engagement is broken off. Well, said Beauchamp. Then, seeing the young man was about to relapse into melancholy, let us go out, Albert, said he. A ride in the wood in the phaeton or on horseback will refresh you. We will then return to breakfast, and you shall attend to your affairs, and I to mine. Willingly, said Albert, but let us walk. I think a little exertion would do me good. The two friends walked out on the fortress. When they arrived at the Madeleine, since we are out, said Beauchamp, let us call on Monsieur de Monte Cristo. He is admirably adapted to revive one's spirits, because he never interrogates, and in my opinion, those who ask no questions are the best comforters. Gladly, said Albert. I love him. Let us call. End of chapter 84.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information and how to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas, as read by Gordon Mackenzie. Chapter 4. Conspiracy. Danglars followed Edmund and Mercédès with his eyes, until the two lovers disappeared behind one of the angles of Fort Saint Nicholas. Then, turning round, he perceived Fernand, who had fallen pale and trembling into his chair, while Caderousse stammered out the words of a drinking song. "Well, my dear sir," said Danglars to Fernand, "here is a marriage which does not appear to make everybody happy." "It drives me to despair," said Fernand. "Do you, then, love Mercédès?" "I adore her." "For long?" "As long as I have known her, always." "And you sit there, tearing your hair instead of seeking to remedy your condition. I did not think that was the way of your people." "What would you have me do?" said Fernand. "How do I know? Is it my affair? I am not in love with Mademoiselle Mercédès. But for you, in the words of the Gospel, seek and you shall find." "I have found already." "What?" "I would stab the man, but the woman told me that if any misfortune happened to her betrothed, she would kill herself." "Pooh! Women say those things, but never do them." "You do not know Mercédès. What she threatens, she will do." "Idiot!" muttered Danglars. "Whether she kill herself or not, what matter, provided Dantès is not captain?" "Before Mercédès should die," replied Fernand, with the accents of unshaken resolution, "I would die myself." "That's what I call love," said Caderousse, with a voice more tipsy than ever. "That's love, or I don't know what love is." "Come," said Danglars, "you appear to me a good sort of fellow, and hang me, I should like to help you, but—" "Yes," said Caderousse, "but how?" "My dear fellow," replied Danglars, "you are 3 parts drunk. Finish the bottle, and you will be completely so. Drink, then, and do not meddle with what we are discussing, for that requires all one's wit and cool judgment." "I? Drunk?" said Caderousse. "Well, that's a good one. I could drink 4 more such bottles. They are no bigger than cologne flasks. Père Pamphile, more wine!" And Caderousse rattled his glass upon the table. "You were saying, sir," said Fernand, awaiting with great anxiety the end of this interrupted remark. "What was I saying? I forget. This drunken Caderousse has made me lose the thread of my sentence." "Drunk if you like. So much the worse for those who fear wine, for it is because they have bad thoughts which they are afraid the liquor will extract from their hearts." And Caderousse began to sing the 2 last lines of a song very popular at the time. "Tous les méchants sont buveux d'eau, c'est bien prouvé par le déluge." The wicked are great drinkers of water, as the flood proved once for all. "You said, sir, you would like to help me, but—" "Yes, but I added, to help you it would be sufficient that Dantès did not marry her you love, and the marriage may easily be thwarted, methinks. And yet Dantès need not die. Death alone can separate them," remarked Fernand. "You talk like a noodle, my friend," said Caderousse. "And here is Danglars, who is a wide-awake, clever, deep fellow, who will prove to you that you are wrong. Prove it, Danglars. I have answered for you. Say there is no need why Dantès should die. It would indeed be a pity he should. Dantès is a good fellow. I like Dantès. Dantès, your health." Fernand rose impatiently. "Let him run on," said Danglars, restraining the young man. "Drunk as he is not much out in what he says. Absence severs as well as death. and if the walls of a prison were between Edmund and Mercedes, they would be as effectually separated as if he lay under a tombstone. "Yes, but one gets out of prison," said Caderousse, who, with what sense was left him, listened eagerly to the conversation. "And when one gets out and one's name is Edmond Dantès, one seeks revenge." "What matters that?" muttered Fernand. "And why, I should like to know," persisted Caderousse. "Should they put Dantès in prison? He has not robbed or killed or murdered." "Hold your tongue," said Danglars. "I won't hold my tongue," replied Caderousse. "I say I want to know why they should put Dantès in prison. I like Dantès. Dantès, your health!" And he swallowed another glass of wine. Danglars saw in the muddled look of the tailor the progress of his intoxication, and turning towards Fernand, said, "Well, you understand there is no need to kill him." "Certainly not, if, as you said just now, you have the means of having Dantès arrested. Have you that means?" "It is to be found for the searching. But why should I meddle in the matter? It is no affair of mine." "I know not why you meddle," said Fernand, seizing his arm. "But this I know. You have some motive of personal hatred against Dantès. For he who himself hates is never mistaken in the sentiment of others." "I? Motives of hatred against Dantès? None, on my word. I saw you were unhappy, and your unhappiness interested me, that's all. But since you believe I act for my own account, adieu, my dear friend. Get out of the affair as best you may." And Danglars rose as if he meant to depart. "No, no," said Fernand, restraining him. "Stay. It is of very little consequence to me at the end of the matter whether you have any angry feeling or not against Dantès. I hate him. I confess it openly. Do you find the means, I will execute it. Provided it is not to kill the man, for Mercedes has declared she will kill herself if Dantès is killed." Caderousse, who had let his head drop to the table, now raised it, and looking at Fernand with his dull and fishy eyes, he said, "Kill Dantès? Who talks of killing Dantès? I won't have him killed. I won't. He's my friend, and this morning offered to share his money with me as I shared mine with him. I won't have Dantès killed. I won't." "And who said a word about killing him, muddlehead?" replied Danglars. "We were merely joking. Drink to his health," he added, filling Caderousse's glass, "and do not interfere with us." "Yes, yes, Dantès' good health," said Caderousse, emptying his glass. "Here's to his health, his health! Hurrah!" "But the means, said Fernand. "Have you not hit upon any?" asked Danglars. "No, you undertook to do so." "True," replied Danglars. "The French have the superiority over the Spaniards, that the Spaniards ruminate, while the French invent." "Do you invent, then?" said Fernand impatiently. "Waiter," said Danglars, "pen, ink, and paper." "Pen, ink, and paper," muttered Fernand. "Yes, I am a supercargo. Pen, ink, and paper are my tools, and without my tools I am fit for nothing." "Pen, ink, and paper, then!" called Fernand loudly. "There's what you want on that table," said the waiter. "Bring them here." The waiter did as he was desired. "When one thinks," said Caderousse, letting his hand drop on the paper. "There is here wherewithal to kill a man more sure than if we waited at the corner of a wood to assassinate him. I have always had more dread of a pen, a bottle of ink, and a sheet of paper than of a sword or a pistol." "The fellow is not so drunk as he appears to be," said Danglars. "Give him some more wine, Fernand." Fernand filled Caderousse's glass, who, like the confirmed toper he was, lifted his hand from the paper and seized the glass. The Catalan watched him until Caderousse, almost overcome by this fresh assault on his senses, rested, or rather dropped, his glass upon the table. "Well," resumed the Catalan, as he saw the final glimmer of Caderousse's reason vanishing before the last glass of wine. "Well, then, I should say, for instance," resumed Danglars, "that if, after a voyage such as Dante's has just made, in which he touched at the island of Elba, someone were to denounce him to the king's procurer as a Bonapartist agent—" "I will denounce him!" exclaimed the young man hastily. "Yes, but they will make you then sign your declaration and confront you with him you have denounced. I will supply you with the means of supporting your accusation, for I know the fact well. But Dantes cannot remain forever in prison, and one day or other he will leave it, and the day when he comes out, woe betide him who was the cause of his incarceration. Oh, I should like nothing better than he would come and seek a quarrel with me. Yes, and Mercedes, who will detest you if you have only the misfortune to scratch the skin of her dearly beloved Edmond." "True," said Fernand. No, continued Danglars. "If we resolve on such a step, it would be much better to take, as I now do, this pen, dip it into this ink, and write, with the left hand, that the writing may not be recognized, the denunciation we propose." And Danglars, uniting practice with theory, wrote with his left hand, and in a writing reversed from his usual style, and totally unlike it, the following lines, which he handed to Fernand, and which Fernand read in an undertone. "The Honourable, the King's Attorney, is informed by a friend of the throne and religion that one Edmond Dantes, mate of the ship Pharaon, arrived this morning from Smyrna, after having touched at Naples and Porto Ferraro, has been entrusted by Murat with a letter for the usurper, and by the usurper with a letter for the Bonapartist committee in Paris. Proof of this crime will be found on arresting him, for the letter will be found upon him, or at his father's, or in his cabin on board the Pharaon." "Very good," resumed Danglars. "Now your revenge looks like common sense, for in no way can it revert to yourself, and the matter will thus work its own way. There is nothing to do now but fold the letter as I am doing, and write upon it, 'To the King's Attorney,' and that's all settled." And Danglars wrote the address as he spoke. "Yes, that's all settled," exclaimed Caderousse, who, by a last effort of intellect, had followed the reading of the letter, and instinctively comprehended all the misery which such a denunciation must entail. "Yes, and that's all settled. Only it will be an infamous shame." And he stretched out his hand to reach the letter. "Yes," said Danglars, taking it from beyond his reach, "and as what I say and do is merely in jest, and I, amongst the first and foremost, should be sorry if anything happened to Dantes, the worthy Dantes. Look here, and taking the letter he squeezed it up in his hands and threw it into a corner of the arbor. "All right," said Caderousse. "Dantes is my friend, and I won't have him ill-used." "And who thinks of using him ill? Certainly neither I nor Fernand," said Danglars, rising and looking at the young man, who still remained seated, but whose eye was fixed on the denunciatory sheet of paper flung into the corner. "In this case," replied Caderousse, "let's have some more wine. I wish to drink to the health of Edmond and the lovely Mercédès." "You have had too much already, drunkard," said Danglars, "and if you continue you will be compelled to sleep here, because unable to stand on your own legs." "I?" said Caderousse, rising with all the offended dignity of a drunken man. "I can't keep my own legs? Why, I'll wager I can go up into the belfry of the Accoules, and without staggering too." "Done," said Danglars. "I'll take your bet, but tomorrow. Today it is time to return. Give me your arm and let us go." "Very well, let us go," said Caderousse. "I don't want your arm at all. Come, Fernand, won't you return to Marseille with us?" "No," said Fernand. "I shall return to the Catalans." "You're wrong. Come with us to Marseille. Come along." "I will not." "What do you mean, you will not?" "Well, just as you like, my prince. There's liberty for all the world. Come along, Danglars, and let the young gentleman return to the Catalans if he chooses." Danglars took advantage of Caderousse's temper at the moment to take him off toward Marseille by the Porte Saint-Victor, staggering as he went. When they had advanced about 20 yards, Danglars looked back and saw Fernand stoop, pick up the crumpled paper, and putting it into his pocket, then rush out of the arbor towards Pilon.
"Well," said Caderousse, "why, what a lie he told! He said he was going to the Catalans, and he's going to the city. Hullo, Fernand!"
"No, you don't see straight," said Danglars. "He's gone right enough."
"Well," said Caderousse, "I should have said naught. How treacherous wine is!"
"Come, come," said Danglars to himself. "Now the thing is at work, and it will effect its purpose unassisted." End of chapter 4. As read by Gordon Mackenzie. Troy, Michigan, October 2006.